Hello YouTube, my name is Matthew, and today I would like to talk about a book that I just finished reading. The book came out in 2017, I believe. It is titled Freud, The Making of an Illusion by Frederick, Cruz. Now why do I want to talk about this book? I want to talk about this book because I have had a fascination with Sigmund Freud and his work for a long time now. I don't claim to be unique in that respect. A lot of people have found Freud's life and thought captivating, interesting, and so forth. But what's interesting to me, maybe beyond all else, is the fact that Freud either is one of those figures that either elicits blame and hate, or is lauded and applauded and thought of as this wonderful saint. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. He's either considered a sinner or a saint. There are certain historical figures that people either really like them or really dislike them. And those are the historical figures that I find the most interesting to study, to talk about, to think about, because quite often many people get those figures wrong. And Frederick Cruz is I think he's a retired English professor, and he takes the side, he's arguing that Freud is basically a villain. I'll try to expand on that. Obviously, there's more to it than just, Freud's a bad person, full stop. But he clearly is suspicious of Freud. He's suspicious of Freud's ideas. He thinks Freud is a failed scientist, a failed therapist. He says Freud, there was never a patient that ever was cured by Freud or ever found solace in Freud's method. As I said, he was a failed scientist. Cruz says that Freud often, had these ideas about how the mind works, and he didn't bother testing them. He just automatically assumed that if he had an idea that it was right. He says he's very upset that Freud was a proponent in his earlier years of cocaine. He blames Freud. Maybe it wouldn't be fair to say he quite blames Freud for the cocaine epidemic that happened long after he died, although that's almost what Cruz is trying to insinuate. But basically, he says, we look at Freud, he was touting cocaine as as this medical miracle, how crazy of him, how irrational. And then he's also speculating about Freud's personal life. He several times he asks, was Freud a homosexual? He speculates, or he believes, actually, it's not a speculation, he believes that Freud had an affair with his sister-in-law, and he even believes that he got the sister-in-law pregnant and paid for the sister-in-law to have an abortion. He accuses Freud of being a domineering husband, of kind of snuffing out his wife, of forcing her just to be a plain old housewife, not allowing her to express herself, not allowing her to be her own person. He accuses Freud of being anti-Christian. Near the end of the book, he's pretty adamant that psychoanalysis was Freud's attempt at revenge against the Christian world, which did not often look nicely on Jews like himself. He accuses Freud of medical manslaughter. One of the patients he had, I think, he was giving a patient several medications at once. And I think he even acknowledges, though, that at the time, it wasn't understood that these medications might have ill effects, but the patient died. And he said, well, that's, sign that Freud committed medical manslaughter. He even insinuates that a patient of Freud's, now we're not certain, I think, the scholarship isn't quite clear. We're not sure if she was a patient of Freud's or not, but, he basically says she was a patient of his and she killed herself. So he basically is saying, well, he probably did something to make her kill herself. He accuses Freud of loving money too much, of, just being a therapist just for the money. He accuses Freud, it goes on and on. I guess I can say one more, then I'll kind of reinterpret or I'll refocus this conversation. He also accuses Freud of grooming his daughter to be, his replacement when he dies. He doesn't quite say that in so many words, but that's kind of a lot of what he says. It kind of leaves impressions with the audience or with the reader. It's not, he doesn't quite say this or that, but it's like he's hinting at a lot of these things. But I'm definitely not trying to, I don't think I'm putting words in his mouth. I'm doing my best to give how he views Freud. And, it's pretty bad. He really thinks Freud was not a good person. He thinks that we need to completely reevaluate the way we view Freud, and that people hold him up as this great liberator, this great humanitarian, and that just doesn't hold up to investigation. Now, it's true. I find this book kind of frustrating in many ways. I mean, because I think there are aspects of his critique which are spot on. So I'm not trying to say that the book is just complete gibberish. It's well written. He obviously did do a lot of research. I'm glad I read it, but it is also very frustrating because, along with certain legitimate criticisms he has of Freud, there's also this tabloid-esque manner in which he's writing the book. So, like the question, was Freud a homosexual? Well, I mean, he married a woman, he had 6 kids, but he did acknowledge that he had homosexual feelings in his letters, in his writings. So, maybe, but I don't really care. That really doesn't mean much at the end of the day. Did he have an affair with his sister-in-law? And did he force his sister-in-law to have an abortion, or did he just give her the money so she could have an abortion? Maybe. Again, it really doesn't matter. I mean, that would be, especially the part about getting his sister-in-law pregnant and giving her the money to get an abortion. If that did happen, that was unfortunate that he did that. That shows a lack of judgment on his part. That would show that he had some serious character flaws. So that would be very unfortunate if he had done that, and disappointing. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's not really the question, or it shouldn't be anyway. Did Freud love money? I don't know. Again, I don't really think that matters so much. Now, I mean, obviously Freud was a human being, so of course he was flawed. So, he and one thing that is obvious, I think, is he was not always scientific in his approach. I think that's unquestionably true. He did a lot of brainstorming. He did a lot of theorizing, but quite a large portion of it was not scientific. Now, in psychoanalysis, for partly due to Freud and partly due to Freud's followers, has been treated as kind of a pseudo-religion of sorts. I think apparently the psychoanalytic community has they've kind of guarded some of the Freud archives and kind of maybe hid things that they don't think people will like. That can partly be blamed on Freud, but that can also be blamed on his followers. And that's alarming, and we need to correct for that. But I don't think that those things completely undermine Freud or his thought or his legacy. Because, for several reasons. One, psychology is just, it's a soft science, so it can be hard. It's not impossible, of course, but it can be hard to look at the human mind in a scientific framework. There are certain... It's not as easy as being scientific in the natural sciences, in the hard sciences, so-called hard sciences. Social sciences aren't like the hard sciences in that respect. It can be harder to run experiments. It can be harder to get data. It can be harder to corroborate data. And another reason I don't think it undermines Freud is because he gave us certain tools to help us understand ourselves and understand the world. Now, those were flawed tools, and psychoanalytic thinkers, have discarded certain bits of Freud or corrected some mistakes he made. So again, he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He had missteps. But there are certain things that he got right that we kind of take for granted now. The Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, I'm not a big fan of him, but I think his view of Freud is right. We kind of shortchange Freud a bit. We accept a lot of the things that he thought about and wrote about as self-evident. And because he's become sort of a climate of opinion, as Auden said, what's left of Freud, to many people's eyes, is all of the mistakes he made. And again, we can acknowledge his mistakes, but the idea that people aren't fundamentally rational owes a lot to Freud. The idea that people, or that we kind of have conflicting emotions in ourselves, and that it's almost like we're different people in some sense when we're angry, sad, happy. the idea that our relationships towards both sexes, but perhaps particularly the opposite sex, or at least the sex we're most attracted to, I should say, are greatly shaped by the relationships we had with our parents and in the nuclear family. That's widely accepted. The idea that society kind of inhibits sexuality in some ways might necessarily do so. The idea that a lot of these the idea that we can perfect the world and we can kind of reshape ourselves, reshape society for the greater good. Freud was suspicious of that. And I think a lot of us nowadays are very suspicious of that, based on, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The idea that dreams, they carry some metaphorical meaning. They don't really carry. There's not quite a easy handbook. You can't really plug a dream into a mathematical formula and say this is what it means. But it's interesting to acknowledge that we dream, and it's interesting to think about what dreams mean in terms of the way we think, the way the human mind organizes itself. The idea of the unconscious mind, of things that aspects of ourselves that maybe we're not fully aware of, or not fully in control of. A lot of these things stem from Freud. And there are other people along the way too. He wasn't the only psychological pioneer, and he also was very influenced by other people, and he took on other people's ideas, which is true. So it's not as if Freud was on a desert island just devising everything by himself. He had predecessors. He had teachers and people who influenced him a lot. But I think it's incorrect to say that Freud is dead. I think it's incorrect to say that there's nothing more we can learn from Freud, and that Freud was just, as Frederick Cruz might put it, a failure and a fraud. That's basically the argument in this book. That Freud was a failure as a scientist, and so he pretended to be successful, and that everyone was credulous enough to believe his lies. I'm not a Freud scholar, but I just don't think that's a fair assessment of Freud and his legacy. And even if I accept all of the negative character judgments that Cruz makes in this book, I don't think that undermines Freud as a thinker. Many thinkers, many artists, many scientists have not been very good people, or they've been profoundly flawed people. That doesn't mean they have to be completely dismissed as philosophers, scientists, artists, etc. But it seems as if because Freud is speaking about the human mind, something that most of us feel like we're an expert on because we deal with people every day, it seems to give people the green light to use Freud's personal failings as proof that he was completely wrong as a psychologist. And that's what I disagree with, and that's what I think we need to think about when we're studying Sigmund Freud. I'll just end, I guess, with quoting, off the top of my head, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I remember also reading a biography of Freud by Peter Gay. Now, Frederick Cruz calls Peter Gay gullible, so obviously he wouldn't like it that I cite Peter Gay, but Peter Gay has an interesting sentence in his biography where he says, it's possible that Freud was riddled with defects, but was also the greatest psychologist in history. I can't think of a better way of encapsulating Freud, his work, and his legacy. So, thank you for listening, and take care.